Welcome to video number 6 in Module 309, Class 4 Driver Training. This particular video looks at something called Hours of Service, and you'll find it in Chapter 7 of the Driving Commercial Vehicles manual. And I can't recommend enough that you go and look at it there because it's a bit confusing for most people, and it's ironic because while you need to know this information for your test, it's unlikely it'll ever matter a great deal to you when you're actually out there in the field. Nonetheless, you do need to know it, and it can be somewhat confusing. If you operate any vehicle that has seating for 11 or more and operates as a bus, you need to know these rules, which is why it's part of the license. The idea behind hours of service is to make sure that drivers remain safe and don't become too tired to operate safely. They look at really 3 different things: driving time, on-duty time, and off-duty time. Driving time is what it sounds like, the time that you spend actually operating the vehicle. On-duty time includes other duties that would be work, such as putting fuel in the vehicle, doing your pre-trip or post-trip inspections, stopping at weigh scales, checking or securing loads, brake checks, stopping at customs, selling tickets to people. These are all examples of on-duty time, even though you're not driving the vehicle. There is a minimum of 10 hours of off-duty time required for every driver daily, and a maximum of 13 hours of driving time allowed per day. And if you do the math, you can see that equates to 23, not 24 hours, and I'll explain more in a moment. So the rules can become a bit confusing, as I said, but they look at not just the total amount of hours of off-duty you must have, but also the consecutive hours of off-duty that you have, so that you get a meaningful period of time to rest. So not only do you have to have a minimum of 10 hours of not being at work, you have to have 8 of those hours be consecutive. And that could mean that you're in the back of the sleeper compartment of a large vehicle having a sleep. It could mean that you're at home in your own bed or watching TV at home. It could mean that you're at a motel. But they have to be 8 hours consecutive, and they cannot be in the passenger seat or the driver's seat of the vehicle. So if you pull over and pull out your phone and start emailing your friends, that doesn't count as off-duty time. And you can only have, when you put together 14 hours of on-duty, meaning both driving and any amount of on-duty time, such as the other things in the list above, that's your maximum. So 13 hours of driving or 14 hours of on-duty. So again, if you drive for 8 hours, but you spend 5 or 6 hours dealing with paperwork, you have got your 14 hours. You don't get 13 hours and 14 hours of on-duty. It's one of the two. You will be expected to complete a logbook if you drive under these circumstances, and to keep it with you and to provide it anytime you're asked to by a law enforcement officer, whether it's the police, whether it's commercial vehicle safety inspector, or whether it's at a weigh scale. Really, any peace officer can ask you to do this. There are 2 different cycles that professional drivers use, and they're simply called Cycle 1 and Cycle 2. Cycle 1 says that you can only drive for a maximum of 70 hours or be on duty for 70 hours in a 7-day span. And then afterwards, if you see down here, after you do that, you must take 36 hours off to reset to start your cycle again. If you're on Cycle 2, it's a little bit more flexible. You might see this with people who do really long hauls or who work in remote areas, for example, like camps. Those people can work a maximum of 120 hours in a 14-day period, but they must take 24 hours off before they get to their first 70. They can't, for example, work 12 days and then take off some time. The idea is to have people have some rest in the middle. And if you work the Cycle 2 approach, you have to have 72 consecutive hours off before your cycle starts again. And the peace officers or law enforcement officers can tell by looking at this logbook. And if you look at the chapter, you'll get a clear idea of how it works. It takes a real art to do them when you're not experienced, but once you get experienced, they're pretty simple. It's really important to understand that you cannot falsify these documents and they must be up to date. So if, for example, you get pulled over by a law enforcement officer and you say, I haven't filled it in for 3 days, sorry, it would be like saying, I don't have my driver's license, sorry. You are expected to have it. And remember what I said, if you're in a vehicle that has a sleeping berth, you are considered to be off duty when you go in the sleeping berth, even if somebody else is driving the vehicle while you're doing that. But if you're sitting in the passenger seat, you are not considered off duty. Logbooks are not required if you are going to be closer than 160 kilometers from where your vehicle has a base. So that's why it's unlikely you'll ever need them in our field, even though you have to know it for the test. If it is required, as I said, it has to be up to date, reflected back to your last change of duty. It has to be given to your employer on a regular basis every 20 days, and you have to show it to any of these law enforcement officers when you request it. If you drive into the United States or over the border into the Yukon or Northwest Territories, the rules become different once again because each state has their own rules, and because when you get into the north and the driving conditions are more harsh, there are even more careful considerations. All right, that's it for this one. Sorry that it's not the most exciting and that it's a bit confusing, but do go back and review it and make sure you understand it because it's both on our test as well as on the ICBC test.